She don't use Instagram, she be using Shanagram. Main event at SummerSlam, main event for right price. I was wrong one time, now I'm getting right twice. Pour a belly in, now the cup's spliced. That's what I like.
Where'd you move here from?
Out of your friends, which are you? Truck freak, crazy ass. The Fight.
Last of Us is one of my favorite games of all time. It's a game that made me want to write myself. The game has excellent characters, a tightly put together narrative, and absolutely beautiful themes. It's also a game that kind of found me at the right time too. I was in high school when I first played The Last of Us. I hate to get personal, but there was this girl that I kind of liked and she cheated on me, kinda. My grandpa died around this time too. One of my best friends kind of cut me off for reasons that I still don't fucking know. It was a very rough 1 to 3 month period for me. So being someone who loved the Uncharted games and was fresh off an Uncharted 4 playthrough, I was curious about The Last of Us. Apparently it's one of the best games ever made or something, but Uncharted 2 is the best game ever made. What's up with this? I then remembered that I had a download code for The Last of Us Remastered on PS4. I just never installed it until now. So I put it in, popped the game in, half expected Uncharted but M-rated with zombies. These two people on the box, I heard they don't like each other or something, but that they grow to know each other over time or something. So it's like Enslaved Odyssey to the West, a game that only I've ever played. Oh, so the girl is Joel's daughter, right? Aw, she's adorable.
Oh my god, that is so adorable.
Oh, and he's...
I wonder what happens to them. Maybe the apocalypse makes them grow estranged or something?
Listen to me, I know this hurts you. You're gonna be okay, baby, stay with me. Please, please don't. Please.
Yeah, right from the opening, The Last of Us gut punches you. But it's through that where the game tells this beautiful story. This tightly knit narrative with some of the best writing I've ever seen in a video game. Not to imply, of course, there haven't been narratively complex games before The Last of Us. And not to imply it's the absolute peak or anything, but I think The Last of Us is near that point. These are some of the most human conversations I've heard in a game. All these well-defined characters mean something within Joel's arc. This on top of knowing what Joel actually went through years ago, and seeing the amazing chemistry he has with Ellie. At first being emotionally distant and constantly shutting her out, but then later on seeing her as his second daughter, is the kind of character arc that I live my life for. A lot of people see The Last of Us and talk about how sad the game is. So many characters die and go through these terrible events. And yeah, it's all really sad and all, but I think the big plot twist is that in spite of all the fucked up shit that happens in it, it's actually a surprisingly optimistic game. In spite of the fucked up shit that happens, characters accept themselves by the end. You see characters that Joel could potentially turn into, like the often emotionally distant and unhinged Bill, or he could end his suffering like Henry did, ending his own life when the person he loves passes away. But Joel doesn't. He learns to accept himself and his grief. And yes, that is a very simple way of summarizing this entire game. But look, this intro's already 2 minutes long, okay? So due to my love and personal attachment to The Last of Us, and upon hearing the announcement of a Last of Us TV show on HBO, I knew that any kind of change would be insanely weird to me. And no matter what happened, I would always be biased towards the game. Even if I tried putting them aside, it's just kind of how it subconsciously is. I was cautiously optimistic going into it. On the one hand, I want the story to be given to a greater audience, but on the other hand, after shit like the Uncharted movie and Doom Annihilation, which I did videos on, it begged the question, would they respect the source material? Well, after watching the entire show, I can safely say, yeah, they did. This is by far the best video game adaptation of all time, which isn't really saying much. I mean, everything else is total garbage. Even an okay adaptation would have been like the best. But The Last of Us is both a really good adaptation and at certain points an achievement for TV show writing. I think there are a lot of things the show does that's really impressive, while also keeping the spirit of the games intact. It's a very good adaptation. It does a lot of things to keep it original and fresh, while still keeping the same themes and storyline. This allows the show to be respectful, but also not a complete replacement for the game. Overall, I liked it. But there are some things that were lost in translation on the way to TV show status. Things that I feel stopped the show from being truly great. There are some genuine improvements to the games, and then there are other weird changes that just don't work for me. I would say The Last of Us is a pretty good show, almost great in fact, and absolutely a step in the right direction. However, there are problems with the show. Problems that I think future video game adaptations should look at and improve on. Now, once again, I did like the show, and at certain points, I even loved it. However, for all its 9 out of 10 moments, there are also some 5 out of 10 moments, let's call them. And I want to make a rushed YouTube video talking about it. Let's talk about it. If there's one summarized way I can describe my overall thoughts on the game versus the show, I would say the show has better world building, but the game has better writing and even presentation. The Last of Us show does a way better job fleshing out the universe. The game has very light environmental storytelling that literally can't be done in movies or shows, so the way the show fleshes out its universe is not only very good and very smart, but quite a few times it's actually better than the game. The intro in the first episode is really good, where the game starts off with Joel and Sarah on the couch. The show starts off with a 1960s news interview, where the cordyceps virus is very briefly explained. Not only is it really smart exposition, cluing into the audience what the universe is and what this virus is, but it's also very foreboding, and gives you this sense of dread going forward. You then go into Joel and Sarah's relationship, going through a whole day with Sarah. It helps the audience really connect with her. In the game, you briefly play as Sarah, and there's once again that environmental storytelling, which works in the game, but wouldn't really work in a show as well, without making Sarah overly bland. The watch store scene was my favorite scene from this part. There's that ambulance rushing by, the shopkeepers are more and more panicked. This is really good stuff. I do kind of miss, though, that scene where Joel walks into the living room grabbing his gun, seeming more unhinged than usual, really gives that feeling of what the fuck is going on here. In the show, Sarah visits these grandparent characters, and Joel kind of just comes out to save her after they've gotten infected. I preferred how unhinged Joel was in the original game. It's so weird getting red flags from your own dad, which is why that scene works so well. It was really creepy. Once again, would have been better to see the world from Sarah's eyes in that regard, making you really understand how much confusion these characters are going through. I also don't really care for how Sarah went from angelic and innocent to attitude and sass. I'm not a fan of the girl who played as Sarah. She wasn't bad or anything, but I prefer the original game's portrayal. Sarah was a pure soul, and that's why her death hits so hard. And it makes Joel's grief kind of hit harder too. I think the chemistry between Joel and Sarah in the show is still good and all, and Sarah's death is still very effective. In fact, the death itself might actually be more effective. It's way more visceral in the show. It's a lot longer, that's for sure. And Pedro Pascal really nails in the whole mid-denial thing. You can tell he's gradually but quickly losing composure. It's an amazingly acted scene, but the chemistry itself, I don't know, there was a simplicity to the original game. Once again, hearing this really innocent character panic over people being on fire, it still sinks my heart, man. It's small things like that that I feel like the show kinda misses out on at points. However, once again, I do appreciate them fleshing out plenty of other stuff. There's other stuff in the show too that's fleshed out, like Ellie's school life. Ellie's mom has a whole scene dedicated to her. David's a lot more fleshed out, now being a religious cult leader. I was mixed on this at first, but then I went back to his good old boss fight. And yeah, sure enough, there's implications he's a cult leader. The game's maybe more subtle, but the universe in the show is more fleshed out, without taking away from the overall story. This I actually really appreciate. It gives the universe much more finality. However, the show's writing, once again, it really isn't bad. However, the original game has this really human dialogue. You can tell some of the Uncharted skill set is evolved over here. Characters still have that light Uncharted-like wit and sass, but with a lot more maturity and reservation. In other words, these characters talk like human beings, even in the more lighthearted moments.
Ain't been out here in a while.
It's like we're on a date.
Well, I am the romantic type.
You got your ways.
Meanwhile, The Last of Us show, I don't know, man. Compared to the game, something feels off. It's a bit more Hollywood whimsical, if that makes sense. Kind of bordering more on the grim dark part of it being a drama show, with characters more often than not brooding about how sad they are. The characters get a bit more emotional in the show, where in a game where the whole point is that the characters are all suppressing their feelings, and Joel's arc is that he accepts himself and is no longer a jaded shell of a man, it just seems weird the show would be a bit more dramatic about this dialogue. I think this more specifically hurts Joel himself. Joel being more emotional kind of ignores his biggest character flaw in the original game. It was that he was not an open person. Joel crying to Tommy about his emotional trauma and PTSD may be more emotional, I guess, but it also kinda misses the point. Once again, I don't want to imply that the show is poorly written. In fact, I think it's pretty well written. Characters still feel very down to earth, they're still very well defined, and there are new dialogue moments I did enjoy in the show. In episode 9, Joel and Ellie have a conversation. It's about Joel's suicide attempt. It's an interaction I'm pretty shocked wasn't in the original game. Even though it is missing the part where Ellie gives Joel a photo of Sarah, fully bringing his arc into a complete circle.
So no matter how hard you try, I guess you can't escape your past. Thank you.
There are also plenty of other moments with pretty phenomenal writing. It really is not bad on its own, but the game's writing is just so much better in my opinion. There's so much subtlety and nuance, and yet so much real, raw humanity. In this department, I think the game solos easy. Once again, I think the show has better world building, but the game has better writing. It makes it really weird to talk about because there are things that are better about the show and better about the game. There are upgrades and downgrades. As you can tell, the show is really, really weird. However, the biggest and probably best change is easily episode 3. This is a very effective and incredible episode. The episode reinterprets the story of Bill and Frank and turns it into this tragic love story. It's easily one of the, if not the best episode in the show. Bill meets Frank and the two of them fall in love, and even though their personalities may differ, with Bill being kind of a nutcase, yet Frank being more level-headed, they still stick with each other. That is, until Frank experiences medical problems, being paralyzed from the waist down. Frank then asks Bill to marry him and give him one last dinner before putting a lethal amount of sleeping pills into his wine. Bill, reluctant, does what Frank says, but then revealing he also put a lethal dose into his wine. Bill and Frank then return to their room and die together. It's a very bittersweet episode. Some of my friends cried during this episode, and I won't lie, I got a little teary-eyed during it too. This is the show at its absolute best in my opinion. This episode is very effective. Bill and Frank getting married to Max Richter's On the Nature of Daylight is a very effective use of the song. There's plenty of push and pull in their story. It's incredibly engaging. It's also a great new standard for LGBTQ+ relationships in works like this. This episode was fantastic. I think it's one of the best in the series. But Bill was better in the game. As beautiful as this relationship and episode was, once again, something was lost in translation. Okay, so in the game, Bill drove Frank to suicide, making him a cautionary tale type story, and a mirror to Joel if he doesn't open up to anybody. Bill is what Joel could be, constantly denying and deflecting his own problems. He becomes cruel and crazy, intentionally shutting people out. And this is incredibly smart, using side characters to reflect the main character. The thing is, the TV show might be more emotional, but the game is more symbolic. And that's the tricky part with the Last of Us TV show. It really is a different reinterpretation of the same general story. And honestly, which one you choose to watch or enjoy is really your choice. As you can tell, each one has their own improvements, but also their own set of problems. And episode 3 is the biggest and yet weirdest example of this. Like, yeah, it's a phenomenal, amazing episode, but I don't feel like Bill personally influences Joel as much, which makes Joel's overall development feel a bit more disjointed. Would I have removed this from the show? I don't know. I don't think so. Am I mad about it? No, of course not. This was a phenomenal episode. And obviously there are much worse changes that could have been made, like casting Mark Wahlberg in one of the roles. Once again, I love and appreciate this episode on its own merits, but in the context of it being an adaptation, I wish more was kinda done. Now here's some other brief stuff I like and don't like. I don't like how they took out the 4-season structure of the original game, where by the end it symbolizes a new beginning for these characters. Furthermore, the final shootout is also pretty bad. It's really poorly shot. It's not great. In the original game, Joel is way more desperate to get Ellie out of the hospital. He's not nearly as desperate, probably to set up part 2 or something, but it's also just really poorly choreographed, like it's really bad. The cast, however, is absolutely fantastic. Pedro Pascal is great as Joel. Bella Ramsey is still a spunky and pretty cool Ellie. Once again, Bill and Frank are excellently cast, same for Tess. That one clicker scene in episode 5 is fucking amazing. Sarah's death is translated absolutely well. They removed the make every shot count line, don't like that very much. Sam is a lot younger and also deaf. It doesn't add too much, but it's not a change I hate at all. It's interesting actually, although I will miss that conversation Ellie and Sam have about God in the original game. There's a new character, a rebel leader, who's kind of boring and I don't really like her. She's so boring, in fact, I don't remember her fucking name. Overall, a lot of positives and negatives, and I know I complained a lot, but I am overall positive with the Last of Us show. It's not perfect, but I do recommend it. What's most important is that even though there are some missed marks, this show really does respect the source material, and that to me is very important. This show is really, really good, but it isn't great. But I still didn't waste my time with it. I had a lot of fun watching it. It's fun watching my parents react to a lot of these scenes, and you're not really losing anything if you decide to watch it over the game. It's a different version of the same story, but more importantly, it respects the original, finally. And of course, I will always recommend the game. It's one of my favorite games of all time, perfectly paced, perfectly written, and even with my own nitpicks and biases, I'm glad I got a good adaptation of a great game. I'm feeling 7 out of 10 Mark Wahlberg.
Fuck you in the lanes you came with. Me and you ain't on the same shit, you ain't in my lane, bitch, nah. Throw that shit in fifth, rollie on my wrist. Ay, baby, you a star, I'm my only wish. I'm counting blue hundreds, I'm too money. Ay, and my little bitch, she too lovely. Yeah, hanging up and calling me right back. Ay, baby, why you calling me like that? Yeah, getting high with the seat, lay back. Baby, gon' relax, yeah. Hey, they don't know the half, yeah. No matter what happened, I got your back. Baby, that's the facts, yeah. That's the facts, yeah. We can fight, but the feeling's gone. I try to find the words, but they never come. I can still see you on the lawn. Hey, laying outside in the summer sun. Yeah, we can fight, but the feeling's gone. I try to find the words, but they never come. I can still see you on the lawn. Hey, laying outside in the summer sun. Hey, I'm with a dark-skinned girl on a Sunday. That's that Black Sabbath. She put them ones all down on a Hyundai, and she had to have it. Baby, that's the facts, yeah. That's the facts, yeah.